Gospel. Welcome to House of the Gospel. Thank you for joining us today. And as we continue studying this topic, the sermon series that we titled The Radical Sayings of Jesus Christ. We are in part 4 of this series, and so welcome, and I hope you have your Bibles with you as we're starting another radical saying of Jesus. You know, the point of this series is to look at sayings of Jesus that are as radical today as they were 2,000 years ago when Jesus proclaimed them. And because the reality is, the reason we wanted to do this series, because the reality is that everyone in our culture loves Jesus until they actually read what he said, right? Then they read what he said and like, well, hold on, that's not the Jesus I believe in, because our culture created a picture of Jesus that is not often true in the Bible. So what we want to do with this series is we want to look at these radical sayings of Jesus, and because oftentimes in those sayings, he speaks a lot of truth that speaks to us today. And so far we covered 3 topics. We covered the topics where Jesus said, I am the only way to God. I'm the only way to salvation. Week 2, we covered the topic of that the path to greatness is through servanthood. Last week we talked about Jesus' statement, blessed are the persecuted. And today, ready for this? Hate thy family. Hate your family, Jesus stated. So let's study that and see what God has for us. Jesus made the statement in Luke chapter 14, verse 26. So let's read it together. He says this, if anyone comes to me, Jesus says, and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your life and ministry. You are God who came, who incarnated into, and you became human just like us, and yet you did not sin. Through your ministry, we learn so much through the scriptures. We learn so much about who God is, who you are, and what you want to teach us. And through these statements, through this statement today, teach us, correct us as needed, encourage us as needed, so your name would be glorified through our lives. Amen. How many of you did a recent iPhone update? You got an update and you did the whole update thing. You guys do those, or you avoid them for some conspiracy theory reasons? Do Android people have updates, or is just one thing you get for life? Oh, you do? Oh, okay. You Android people are weird, so I have to check, you know? I'm just kidding. Everyone's welcome. Everyone's welcome, even Android people. But you know, when you get the notification, there's things you're supposed to read, right? Right? You're supposed to do before you accept, you're supposed to read terms and conditions. And nobody reads those, right? Anyone reads those? Don't raise your hand, please, because, you know, we're going to excommunicate you for that, you know? Nobody reads terms and conditions, and it's like, you know, nobody does that. Who cares? It's not important. And you would think, like, when it's something important, I will read it. How many of you read through every single page of your mortgage documents? You didn't. Like, I'm the kind of guy that would, but I didn't, I'll be honest. Like, I kind of skimmed through it, you know, like, but I didn't, and because there's hundreds of pages, I just accepted it. As horrible as that sounds, again, why? Because we say, well, I don't have time for that. Nobody has time for that. According to a 2013 documentary called Terms and Conditions May Apply, maybe some of you have seen it. It's an interesting documentary about social media and terms and conditions and all the hidden stuff behind it. They said this. They said that it would take approximately 180 hours per year to read all the terms and conditions we accept. 180 hours per year. So between the phone updates and mortgage documents and all other things you sign up for and you don't read it, it would take about 180 hours per year to read all those terms and conditions. There was a social experiment done a couple of years ago it was during April Fool's Day. So for that one day, this company, it was a British gaming company called GameStation. They added a clause to their terms and conditions that 7,500 people just bought stuff and accepted without reading it. And for that one day, they added a clause, and here's what it said. It said this: by placing an order via this website, blah, blah, you agree to grant us a non-transferable option to claim for now and forever more your immortal soul. Should we wish to exercise this option, you agree to surrender your immortal soul and any claim you may have on it within 5 working days of receiving written notification from Game Station or one of its duly authorized minions. We reserve the right to serve such notice in 6-foot-high letters of fire. However, we can accept no liability for any loss or damage, and so on. And it's just this huge statement that they put in there. 7,500 people just purchased and clicked accept. Then what they found is only 12% out of those 7,500 people, of those customers, saw the clause later on, and they canceled their subscription. And then the company came out and they said it was all a joke and so on. But the experiment showed that people are willing to sign and commit to anything without giving much consideration. And companies, on the other hand, will use this to hide all kinds of hidden clauses within their contracts for their advantage. You know, the radical statement of Jesus to hate your family is a part of if you will, terms and conditions that every disciple of Jesus must accept. In today's passage, in the context around this phrase, this radical statement, Jesus clearly explains, if you will, for the lack of a better term, terms and conditions of being his disciples. However, unlike the evil corporations of today's world, Jesus never does the small print thing. He never hides conditions. He has no trickery. He doesn't trick his people. He's not hiding anything. Jesus' conditions are very clear, as we will see. They're very plain, and they are very radical. And those who truly want to follow Jesus must think very carefully before accepting his conditions. So let's read the passage for today, which surrounds the radical statement, and we'll break it down after. So Luke chapter 14, verses 25. Here's what the passage says. Now, great crowds accompanied him, meaning Jesus, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king goes out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able to, with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. And he concludes, he says, so therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. How about that for terms and conditions? If you paid attention, how about that for conditions of being the disciple of Jesus Christ? It's not just one radical statement in here. It's like every verse is a radical statement of Jesus Christ. And so if you want to be a disciple of Jesus, you must agree to these conditions. Jesus says a couple times here, you cannot. And he's very clear, you cannot be my disciple unless you agree to these conditions. Now, before I move any farther, let me clarify this about this passage and these statements. If you want to become a Christian, if you want to accept Jesus as your Savior, there are no conditions. There's nothing that you can do, nothing that you can achieve, nothing that you can climb a spiritual or religious ladder so God will love you more or accept you. Nothing. You come to God as you are, and God accepts you. Salvation is free. But discipleship is very costly. Salvation is free. But discipleship, meaning to be what comes after salvation, is very costly. And that's what this passage is describing. So if you are a Christian today here, these also serve as a good reminder for you to not just accept but to review the conditions that you accepted maybe years ago. What did you sign up for, and how does your life right now align with the statements that Jesus is laying out here? How are you doing as a believer? How are you doing as a disciple of Jesus Christ today? How are you doing? So, what are the conditions? Let's break this passage down. The conditions of discipleships. That's what Jesus is going to talk about here. And once again, Jesus begins with I think, one of the most radical statements that Jesus have ever made. This is a radical statement. He is not hiding it. Again, he's not shying away from it, and he just hits the crowd with the statement. He says that in order to be his disciple, you must hate your family, Jesus says. Without a doubt, Jesus does something very provocative here, and he does it for a reason. Now, this was a very shocking statement for people to hear. Again, the setting here is that there's large crowds following Jesus Christ. And for Jesus to turn around as a rabbi and say something like this was a very, very shocking statement. We have to remember that this was an honor-shame culture back in the Near East, in Judea, and in those days, family was everything. Like if we think that here in America, family means a lot, and it kind of loses its meaning these days, in those days, family was everything. You don't turn your back on your family. You can't tell your family that you hate them or you're going to be disowned if you do something like this. Family was everything. Now, put culture aside, from just a strict marketing perspective, is this a good move by Jesus Christ? Like, strictly marketing perspective. Like, is this good for Jesus' movement? Like, Jesus is growing his ministry, starting a church, trying to get more people in, and turns around and says something like this. Not a good move. If you're trying to start a movement, this is the last thing the marketing agents would tell you to do. You don't do that. You tell them how great people are. Follow me as you are. Jesus turns around and he says this. Not a good marketing move as well by Jesus. This passage caused a lot of confusion and debate in Christianity, and again, for a good reason. There's a lot of debates going on. Because Jesus, who clearly, if you take Jesus' teaching, Jesus, who clearly told us and summarized the entire Scripture, Old and New Testament, in two phrases, love God and love people, here he says, hate your family. It doesn't line up. More than that, he didn't just say, love God, love people. He said, love your enemies. So something is off here, it seems. Why is Jesus demanding hatred towards our own family? What clarifies this confusion is understanding the cultural context here of what is going on and what was happening in that culture around Jesus' teaching. Jesus uses a couple things here. Jesus uses here idiom and hyperbole. Remember a few weeks ago we talked about Jesus' statement that the whole camel and eye of the needle, and just like this, rich people can enter into the kingdom of God. Remember that statement? That was a hyperbole, meaning an exaggerated statement to prove a point. This is one thing, one option that Jesus is doing here. Another thing that is most likely here is that in that culture, and this is evident in the writings of the Old Testament, and this is very important to understand this phrase, to love, in that culture, to love one person more than another is described as loving one and hating another. To love someone more than the other it would be described as you love this person and you hate this person. It sounds weird to us. So hating is a Jewish expression for loving less. Do you see where I'm going? I'm going to explain a little bit more. But hating in the context here is a Jewish expression of loving something or someone less. 2 examples for you, quick ones. In Genesis, text describes the story of Jacob loving Rachel more than Leah. And how does it describe it? It says that Jacob loved Rachel and hated Leah. He didn't hate Leah. He loved her less. Or in Genesis also, in the story about Jacob and his brother Esau, it says that God loved Jacob and hated Esau. Esau did not deserve to be hated. He didn't do anything bad necessarily, but God loved Jacob more than Esau, and that's how it's described. And so what is Jesus saying here? It's this. The first condition of discipleship is to love Jesus the most. Put Jesus number one in your life. Love him the most. Jesus is not telling us literally to hate our family, but to love him more than our family. To love Jesus, to be a disciple, is to love Jesus more than anyone or anything else. Every other love in our lives must seem like hate when compared to our love for Jesus. Every other love in our lives must seem like hate when compared to our love for Jesus. Do you see the contrast that Jesus is building here? That's what Jesus is doing here. That's the radical statement that was radical in his day, and it's radical today. We see a similar statement in the Gospel of Matthew when it says this: "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." Same idea here that Jesus is communicating. And so what Jesus means by this condition is that we are to love and obey him more than anyone or anything else. It's about priorities. He must be first. Being Jesus' disciple means that our primary allegiance is to God. Our primary allegiance is to God. No one or nothing can replace Jesus' supreme position in our lives. That's the big idea here. And this has been true for many, many Christians in history of Christianity, and even for some people today. When you believe in Jesus Christ, and then you have tension in your family. Maybe some of you experienced this when you became a Christian, or maybe some of you are experiencing this today. You believed in Jesus, you accepted him as your Savior, and maybe you come from a background that is not non-Christian. Maybe you come from a background from a different denomination of Christianity. And when you pronounced, maybe with naive joy to your family, "I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, Jesus saved me, I'm a new person," you were met with hostility. You were misunderstood. You experienced a type of almost persecution from your own family. And there's tension. There's maybe even division. This is what Jesus is talking about. This is where your faith is being tested. Do you love Jesus more than even your own family? And that's a tough decision. That's a tough situation to be in. But that's a decision that you have to make as a disciple of Jesus, your priority. Now, what's interesting is that Jesus doesn't just stop there. He goes farther, and he says it's not only your family, you need to love me more than your family, more than people. He says you must also love Jesus more than your own very life, your own life. Even his own life, he says here. True disciple of Jesus loves him more than life itself because Jesus is life. True disciple of Jesus loves Jesus more than life itself. And the beautiful truth is a person who commits himself or herself to Jesus will develop a greater love for both neighbors and his family. If you truly love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul and strength, you will have true love for others. That's where true love becomes real is when you first love Jesus, and out of that comes the rest of your life, the love for everyone else. So Jesus makes this radical statement. He begins this sermon here in front of all these crowds, and he says, love me the most. That's the first condition of a disciple. Second condition that we see here is, number 2 is, Jesus says, live a life of sacrifice. In verse 27, he follows up and he says, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, again, this is another radical statement by Jesus within this text. To be his disciple, you don't just hate your family, you must bear your cross. Now, for us, 2,000 years later, this sounds, with especially those of you who grew up in church, this sounds like okay, well, I know exactly what this means. This is a common statement that Christians make, bear your cross, even in our culture. But if you place yourself in that crowd who did not see Jesus crucified, who do not have the concept of crucifixion of Jesus and his sacrifice for us and what all this means, this was a very radical statement. Hold on, Jesus, you're telling me that if I want to be your disciple, which, again, in those days, there were a lot of rabbis, a lot of teachers who had disciples follow them. None of them made that kind of statement. Because what they heard is they said, hold on, Jesus, if I need to be your disciple, that means I need to pick up the cross, means the tool of Roman execution, and that means I'm going to be your disciple? The same thing that Romans, our occupiers, used to humiliate rebels and Jewish freedom fighters and criminals, Jesus, you want me to take that upon myself to follow you? That makes no sense. But what Jesus is saying here is that life of a disciple is a life of sacrifice, self-sacrifice, self-denial. Life where you crucify and put to death your own desires and love for this life in order to follow Jesus. The idea here that Jesus is painting, it's the idea of sacrifice. A true disciple will sacrifice himself, will pick up his cross and follow Jesus. He expands in this in Mark chapter 8, where it says this, and calling the crowds to him with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? A disciple of Jesus must deny himself or herself, kill his own selfish will, take up his own cross, embrace God's will no matter the cost. Take up your cross is willingness to lose your life, your reputation, your pride, your possessions, your status. It's a willingness to lose the ability to gain the whole world, whatever that means in your life, for the sake of Christ. It's being obedient to your God even if you are misunderstood, even if you are persecuted, like we talked about last week. What this also means is that you follow Jesus, you take up your cross of faith, and you follow Jesus even if it means you will be martyred and die for him. I love reading biographies, and especially about missionaries who kind of dedicated and committed their life to preaching the gospel somewhere in countries abroad. And there was this missionary organization years ago, and they would send out these hundreds of missionaries all over the world in these spots where, like the hot spots in the world where Christians are persecuted. And one of the things that they required their missionaries to do is they required them to pack their belongings in a coffin. You would literally, as a missionary, you would be trained, and then you would buy, or somebody would buy a coffin for you. You would put all your belongings in that coffin, and they would ship that coffin to the place you're going to be a missionary. And it was a way of saying, I'm willing to pick up my cross, even if that means that I'm going to come back in this coffin to my family. Pick up your cross and follow him. And there was one instance where one lady, her name is Karen, she went to one of the Muslim countries. And one of the things that these missionaries also had to do, along with the coffin thing, is they had to write a farewell letter. Again, as if when they die, this letter, the family would get this letter, or their loved ones would get this letter. And so there was one missionary, her name was Karen. She was 20 years old. And she went to one of the Muslim countries that persecute and kill Christians. And she died there. She was killed for her faith. She was martyred as a Christian. And she wrote a letter to her pastors. And here's the letter that they read in front of the church when she died. Dear Pastor Phil and Pastor Roger, you should only be opening this in the event of death. When God calls, there are no regrets. I try to share my heart with you as much as possible, my heart for the nations. I wasn't called to a place, I was called to Him. To obey was my objective, to suffer was expected. His glory, my reward. His glory, my reward. The missionary heart cares more than some think is wise, risks more than something is safe, dreams more than something is practical, expects more than something is possible. I was called not to comfort or to success, but to obedience. There's no joy outside of knowing Jesus and serving Him. I love you too and my church family. In His care, Karen. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. Church, my hope is that as a church, as a body of believers, as individual believers, we could confidently say what Karen said. If you replace missionary, not everyone is called to bear this cross. Jesus clearly said in that statement, bear your own cross. So each Christian has his own cross to bear. But my prayer is that as a church, as House of the Gospel, as Christians, we could confidently say what she said. The Christian heart cares more than some may think is wise, risks more than something is safe, dreams more than something is practical, expects more than something is possible. I was called not to comfort or to success, but to obedience. This is our desire as your pastoral team for our church. This is our desire behind the idea for this year, the urgency that we have as a church. What is this urgency for? To fill this place up? No, the urgency is for people to hear the gospel. The urgency is for each one of us at House of the Gospel to take up their cross at their workplace, in their homes, in their neighborhoods, wherever you go, and to live this out right here. Again, not everyone is called to go to Afghanistan. Not everyone is called to go to Mexico. Not everyone is called to do this, but everyone is called to be a missionary where you are at. Amen. And to spread the gospel and to suffer for it if necessary, and to do it with urgency. So condition number 1 is to love Jesus the most. Condition number 2 is to live a life of sacrifice. Condition number 3, this will go faster. Condition number 3 is to count the cost. To be a disciple of Jesus is costly. To be a disciple of Jesus is costly. And before joining Him, you must count the cost. I love this point so much. I love this point so much because many view, especially in America, many view Christianity as an emotionally driven decision. You're full of emotions, you're full of excitement, and in a moment you make a decision, and that's what Christianity is. It's just a bunch of emotions put together. That's what Christianity is, and that's not what Christianity is. Christianity is not an emotional-driven religion. It's not. Here Jesus warns us against hasty, emotional decision to follow Him. Becoming a Christian must be a logical and a calculated move. And what Jesus does is He gives 2 illustrations of what this means. How do you count the cost? What does that mean for Christians? What does it mean for disciples? His first example is about building. It's a constructive example, and his second example is about war, destructive example. So the first example, he says, for which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and counts the cost? There you go. Count the cost. Whenever he has enough to complete it, whether he has enough to complete it. Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. One commentator said that this building became a monument of shame for this person. Every time I read this passage, I think of my childhood back in post-Soviet Ukraine. And I think of, we lived kind of like on the outskirts of town and on the mean streets of Chernivtsi. And in our neighborhood, there were multiple buildings they started the construction and then they abandoned it. If you ever grew up in a post-Soviet country, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There would be these buildings all over the place. Foundation is there, maybe half of the brick wall, and it's done. And it's sitting there for years, Now, for us as kids, that was an amazing place to hang out. We do all kinds of crazy things there, break the walls and, take bricks, whatever, it was great. But that structure right there and those multiple structures would be those monuments of shame. They started the construction, they didn't calculate the costs, and it's just sitting there. So Jesus is saying here is before you make a commitment, you must calculate the costs. How many people you know personally that claim to be followers of Jesus, but they miscalculated the costs? When times got hard, they fall away. When time comes to serve, they're gone. They're not there. You need to stand for the truth, they're not there. Pressures of life, the reality of life starts hitting them. They question God. God is not good. There's no way God is there. Why is God allowing me to go through this? Jesus is clear and he says, count the cost. His second illustration goes along same idea, and I'm not going to read it, but he's saying this: if you are going to wage war, make sure you have enough resources, you have enough people, that your enemy doesn't have powerful allies. Make sure you calculate the costs. Some leaders today didn't get the message, and they're still doing this. And they look like fools because they did not calculate the costs. One Prussian general and military strategist, von Moltke, he said this. He said, speaking about warfare and strategy when it comes to war, he said, simple phrase. He said, first weigh, then venture. First weigh, meaning first calculate, strategize, and then you venture, then you go to war. And once again, the big idea here is that Jesus openly warns people not to follow unless they count the cost of discipleship. They calculate if they are willing to go all the way. It's interesting that both examples here that Jesus is doing, he says count the cost, and both examples, Jesus uses illustration within illustration, and he says, in the case of a builder and in the case of a king, before they make any moves, they need to do what? They need to sit down. Sit down. Before you make any moves, before you do anything, you sit down. Sitting down, what do you do with your family when you make a big decision? You don't do it on the way to the decision. You most likely sit down around your dining table and you talk things over. Because sitting down, it means you're slowing down, you're thinking, you're strategizing. Decision to follow Christ has to be you have to count the cost. American Christianity did a lot of good in this world. A lot of good in this world. I'm not going to downplay that, but at the same time, American Christianity misled a lot of people, I think. A lot of American Christianity is about following Jesus is easy. Just accept God. Raise your hand, quick prayer, get out of hell prayer. It's easy. It's based on emotions. It's based on your feelings. Just follow. It's easy. Follow Jesus. Feel the goosebumps during the song. sing a few emotional songs, and you're good to go. That's following Jesus for you. Hashtag blessed life. Take a picture of Scripture, post it, that's what Christianity is about. Or is it? Jesus says, calculate the cost. Don't make the decision lightly. Love Jesus the most. Live a life of sacrifice. Count the cost. And here's the last point. Jesus says, give everything to Jesus. Give Jesus everything. Jesus concludes this passage and he says, so therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. The life of a disciple of Jesus is all about Jesus. Realization that everything that I have, everything that I own belongs to God. And I'm just a steward. Everything that I have, my money, my talents, my gifts, my family, my reputation, the things I achieved, my status, everything that I have belongs to him. Somebody said that Jesus is either Lord of all or not Lord at all. He's either Lord of all, of everything that you have, or if he's not, then he's not Lord at all. There's no halfway being there and there in Christianity. You're either hot or you're cold. And Jesus is clear in Revelation. He says, I spit you out because you're warm. I want your whole life, your entire life. Not just a little bit there, not compartmentalizing. God is here, my job is here, my taxes are here, and I do some things there. This is here, my family is here, my relation, my sex life is here. God says, I want all of it. He's either Lord of all or not Lord at all. Renounce all. I love how Holman Christian Standard Bible translates this verse. It says, in the same way, therefore, every one of you who does not say goodbye to all his possessions cannot be my disciple. That's what Jesus challenged the rich young ruler to do. He says, say goodbye to all your things. He was a good church boy. He obeyed parents. He did everything that he needed to do, dressed nicely, did everything that was required of him. And Jesus says, you're missing one thing. Say goodbye to all your things. And he walked away sad. The problem is not our stuff. The problem is not the things that we have, our possessions, our money, things that we have. That's not the problem, but the problem is our attachment to those things. And if you put those things, if you're holding on to things, thinking that they will save you, will do something for you, you are missing the point. And so the challenge for us through this message today is, did you say goodbye to everything that's holding you back? Have you left everything behind to follow Jesus? What are you holding on to in life that keeps you from being a faithful follower of Jesus Christ? What are you holding on to? And you're one step there, but then you keep taking 2 steps back because you want to grab things and whatever that is, possessions, money, status, pride, control of things, your ego. What is that you're holding on to and it's not letting you go so you can be full on with Jesus, following him, experiencing miracles, doing things for him, serving him and others? What stops you from giving everything to Jesus? Jesus was very clear with these conditions. You must put him first. You must live a life of sacrifice, count the cost, and give him everything. And the truth is, being a disciple of Jesus Christ is very, very costly. Being a Christian is hard. Amen? If somebody tells you that life was hard, I met Jesus and life is so much easier now, they're lying to you. Life of a Christian is difficult. From an earthly perspective, it's extremely difficult because you're battling sin, because you have opposition. From eternal perspective, it's easy. You know where you're going. But life is difficult here. It's difficult. It's costly. And so Jesus says, count the cost. And the cost is great, but the reward is greater. The cost is great, but the reward is greater. So if you are a Christian here today, maybe today is the day you review the terms and conditions. Maybe today is the day that you prayerfully review, how am I doing as a disciple of Jesus Christ? How am I doing? Do I just keep clicking accept and thinking I'm good to go, or do I need to review some things? Do I need to review these conditions once in a while and be like, Jesus, I need to improve on this. I need to be a better disciple. I need to love people more. I need to put you first before I love people more. Now, if you are not a Christian, let me tell you this. If you are not a believer and you're here today, the cost of discipleship is great because Jesus paid a great price. Jesus paid a great price. Through Jesus, as I mentioned in the beginning, salvation is free for you. Grace is free. Forgiveness is free. Jesus did everything for you to be saved, forgiven, and accepted. Everything. Salvation is free. You can come to God and as you are. But then you must count the cost. And the cost is great, but the reward is greater. And that reward is a life with Jesus Christ. If you would like to come to Jesus today and pray and accept Him and join Jesus on this journey as His disciple, come up to us during next songs or after the church. We would love to pray with you and for you. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your strong language. We thank you for your radical statements that were